Have you ever been treated as if you ruined the atmosphere just by being there, as if your mere presence were a burden? I was the day my own daughter-in-law looked me up and down and said to my son, "Lock her in her room. She ruined the photos." And he simply closed the door. The sound of the lock echoed like a slap no one sees, but one that burns inside. Stay with me until the end, because you'll understand how I realized it in time to protect myself and turn this story to my advantage. That day was supposed to be a celebration, my grandson's birthday, the house full, the smell of cake and good food wafting from the kitchen. I'd spent the morning helping with some preparations, even though, little by little, they were taking things out of my hands, as if to say, "Leave it, we'll do it." I've felt it before, this feigned politeness that hides the desire to distance myself, respect for elders, only in the speech. Deep down, there was something in the air, a mixture of shame and impatience that I already knew. Perhaps you've felt it too. When they placed me in that room, it wasn't just a door that closed. It was 74 years of history being left aside. The party continued in the hallway, with laughter and music, while I stood there, listening to everything from afar. I looked at my hands, which had once held my son in my arms, which had worked day and night to give him a dignified life. Hands that had prepared so many parties, so many cakes, that had held back tears so as not to ruin important moments, and now they were there, quiet, on my lap, as if they were no longer useful. Have you ever experienced this? Have you ever felt like all your worth was suddenly erased? It's a feeling that mixes shame, pain, and a certain emptiness. I remembered other times when I was asked not to appear in photos, not to participate in certain conversations. They say it's etiquette, that it's to keep the focus on who deserves it at that moment. But I know, and perhaps you know too, that behind this lies a silent prejudice, an ageism disguised as care. There, sitting in the corner of that room, I began to pay attention to the sounds. My daughter-in-law's laughter was loud, almost exaggerated, as if she wanted to make sure everyone was happy, without me. My son, oh, my son, he spoke little, as if avoiding thinking about what he'd done. In the midst of this, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't just sadness anymore. It was something burning deeper, a mixture of anger and determination. I knew I couldn't let it go, but before I acted, I took a deep breath. It's not easy to turn humiliation into strength, but I'd survived worse. And in that silence, I began to form a plan. It wasn't revenge for revenge's sake, but a way to show that those who disrespect their elders will one day understand the weight of their own actions. The law of return never fails. You'll understand how I realized it in time to protect myself, and most importantly, how I found a way to make everyone in that room see me again. As the noise of the party continued, I remained quiet, but inside, every second was a step toward something they weren't ready to see. And that's when, as I stood there, listening to the muffled voices and the sound of silverware hitting plates outside, I found myself wondering how many people have experienced something similar. Maybe it wasn't at a party, maybe it wasn't even family, but the feeling of being left out, as if your presence were uncomfortable, is universal. And that's why I need to know. If anything in this story has ever upset you, leave your thoughts in the comments below. I read every word, and your experience can not only strengthen me but also give a voice to those who have never been able to speak. When you comment, when you say "I've been there," or "That's not right," this story stops being just mine and becomes ours. That's how we build a community where no one is invisible. And if you believe more people need to hear this kind of story, please like the video. It may seem like a small gesture, but it's what makes YouTube understand that this message deserves to reach more people. And if you're not already here, subscribe to the channel. That way, you won't miss any future stories, some so intense that even I never imagined I'd tell them. Your participation is what keeps this space alive, what gives me the courage to open up old wounds and transform them into lessons and strength. I stood there, breathing slowly, feeling each second weigh in the air, until the silence of the hallway was broken by an unexpected sound. I was sitting on the edge of the bed, a photo album open on my lap. The yellowed pages depicted faces that time had not erased from my memory. My husband smiling in our first home, my toddler son running in the yard, his first bicycle, his first school uniform. I ran my hands slowly over each image, as if I could touch those days again. Beside it, on the small table, was a simple cake I had made myself that morning, secretly, because I knew they didn't want me involved in the party preparations. I thought that by making it in silence, I could at least contribute something from the heart. But the cake sat there, forgotten, like me. I'm 74 years old. I've been a nurse, caring for strangers with the same dedication I gave my own family. I've been a cook, preparing meals that brought everyone together at the table. I've been a nanny, holding back sleep and exhaustion to rock children in my arms until they fell asleep safely. Today, I'm a nuisance at my grandson's party. It's strange how life can turn upside down without warning. You spend decades being the foundation, and suddenly, you're treated like an old piece of furniture that just takes up space. As I listened to the distant sound of laughter and music, I realized how the contrast between that room and what was happening outside felt like a portrait of my own life. Inside, silence, the smell of old wood, and memories. Outside, lights, colors, and living people. I felt like a faded photograph, forgotten in the back of a drawer while new images were being taken. Without me. I thought about all the decisions that brought me here. How many times I'd put aside my own dreams to support others. How many times I'd been the last to eat, the last to sleep, the first to wake up. And not because I expected anything in return, but because I believed that's what keeps a family together. Today, I realize that not everyone appreciates what they didn't ask for, even if that having is someone who dedicated their entire life to them. It's a hidden truth that hurts to admit. I looked at my hands. They're no longer as steady as they once were, but they still carry the memory of everything they've built. Each wrinkle feels like a map of my journey, and that journey hasn't been easy. There are marks of sacrifice, of silent losses, of battles fought behind the scenes so others could shine in the forefront. And now, they're locked away. It was as if they were trying to tell me that this story no longer mattered, but I know it matters. Because, despite the pain, there's a strength that has never abandoned me, a strength that comes from knowing who I am, from not letting the gaze of others define my worth. They can try to erase me from their photos, but they can't erase the impact I left on their lives. That's something no one can take away. As I flipped through the album, I found a photo of my son as a boy, holding a piece of cake and smearing frosting on his face. I remembered how he'd run up to me that afternoon, laughing, unconcerned about the mess he'd made. He saw no shame in having me around. Back then, I was the center of everything. The image made me smile and, at the same time, felt a lump in my throat. How did we get here? From the hallway, a louder sound pulled me from my thoughts. It wasn't the music or the conversations. It was different, as if something was changing in the rhythm of the party. I closed the album slowly, keeping my hands on it, like someone protecting a treasure. I didn't know exactly what was about to happen, but I could tell something was moving and that, somehow, I would be a part of it. If you understand this feeling of being present but invisible, just write the word present in the comments. I want to know how many of us still understand the true meaning of that word. The house started moving early. I was in the kitchen, trying to help with the last details, but every time I reached out to do something, my daughter-in-law appeared, with that polite smile and the rehearsed phrase, "Leave it, I'll take care of it." At first I tried to believe it was kindness, but all I had to do was look into her eyes and I knew there was something more. It was the kind of expression that measures every gesture, like someone evaluating what's worth keeping close and what needs to be kept out of the way so as not to get in the way. Amanda always had this way of assuming control of the scene. While hanging balloons and setting the table, she gave orders like someone directing a play. I, having been behind the scenes of everyone's lives so many times, realized that my presence wasn't part of the script. When she finally stopped in front of me, holding a flower arrangement, she looked me up and down and said, without hesitation, "It's a youth party today. I don't want you to be in the photos." What hurt most wasn't the sentence itself, but the way it was said. There was no room for conversation, explanation, or affection. It was a blunt warning, a definitive sentence, and I saw, out of the corner of my eye, my son in the hallway. He heard everything. He could have said something, he could have questioned, but he chose silence. That silence that screams louder than any words. It was in that moment that I realized it wasn't just Amanda who wanted to erase me from that celebration. He didn't want to fight it either. I felt heat rise to my face. It wasn't just Shamit. It was a kind of anger that mixed with sadness. creating a weight on your chest that you don't know if you can carry. For a second, I considered turning around and leaving the house, but at the same time, something inside me told me no, I wouldn't leave. Not like this. She approached the guest room door and nodded for me to enter. I hesitated, but my son, still not looking at me, nodded again. I entered. The sound of the door closing was like a seal being placed on my history, and the click of the lock. Sound etched itself in my memory. Outside, the music started again, and voices mingled in a euphoria that seemed to feed on my absence. I sat on the edge of the bed, trying to understand how a day that should have been one of togetherness could turn into such a clear test of rejection. It's curious how life sometimes gives us signs before revealing the full truth. Small details that seem harmless, but together reveal the true intention behind each gesture. That was my revelation in that moment. I wasn't being left out by accident, but by choice. I closed my eyes for a moment and began to recall all the times etiquette was used as an excuse for exclusion. It's not the right time. It doesn't fit the style of the party. It's just to avoid tiring you out. Always sweet words, but laden with silent venom. Today I understand that this kind of attitude isn't Caret's control. It's an attempt to shape the family narrative without the parts that bother or don't fit what they want to show. As the sound of conversation continued, I glanced at the small mirror leaning against the wall. I saw the reflection of a woman who had already undergone so many transformations in her life, but who never imagined facing rejection so directly. And it was there, staring at my own reflection, that I realized something that changed my mindset. I didn't need to ask permission to exist in the spaces I helped create. Outside, I heard the popping of corks, laughter, the party picking up pace, but inside, something completely different was happening. It was as if every second locked away was fueling an energy I didn't know I still had. A mixture of grief, determination, and an almost physical urge to expose the truth hidden behind that false care. I picked up the photo album that still lay on the bed and held it tightly. Each page seemed to remind me that my story has value, and that a locked room wouldn't rewrite it. I knew that, somehow, this narrative would still change course. If you've ever experienced a moment where you suddenly realized you were being excluded on purpose, write the word "I woke up" in the comments. I stood there, motionless, with the album open on my lap and a black and white photo right in the center of my hands. It was a portrait of a long ago Sunday, one of those times when everyone gathered in the backyard to eat together. I was younger, my hair tied up messily, my apron covered in flour, and a smile that didn't fit in the photo. Beside me, my still small son, holding my arm as if the world were safer that way. I touched my fingers to the image and felt a pang that mixed longing and indignation. How could someone who was once the center of so many memories now be treated like an annoying detail? The room was dark, lit only by a sliver of light escaping through the crack in the door. The sounds of the party were muffled, almost as if from another world. For a moment, I felt like a ghost watching from afar the life that no longer included me. But as the silence enveloped me, I began to notice something different. It wasn't just the pain of exclusion. There was also a new energy emerging. I held the photo tighter. This time, I wasn't going to swallow it in silence. Not for God's sake, not for love's sake. It was no longer about accepting or enduring. It was about deciding. And decisions like that don't come with shouting, they come with certainty. The certainty that there are moments in life when silence is more powerful than any speech, but only if it's the prelude to action. I began to think about all the times I'd been led to believe that retreat was the wisest course of action, how many situations were disguised as protective gestures, when in reality they were maneuvers to keep me out of reach, invisible behind the scenes. What I'd previously accepted as care, I now saw as control. It was the revelation I needed. My mindset shifted almost instantly. I remembered stories I'd heard as a child, about women who, even when faced with injustice, found subtle ways to turn things around, not with violence, but with intelligence. I realized that, in that situation, there was no point in waiting for someone to give me back the space they'd taken away. I would have to win it back. I looked out the bedroom window. From there, I couldn't see the party, but I could picture the table set, the guests smiling for the camera, and Amanda circling like the perfect hostess. The difference was that now, while she reprised her usual role, I was behind the scenes, crafting my own narrative. This was my journey now, silent transformation, but impactful enough to leave a mark. There was no rush. Every minute that passed gave me more clarity about what needed to be done. I knew that acting impulsively could turn my cause into yet another reason to paint me as problematic. So I took a deep breath, held the photo to my chest, and let my anger transform into determination. I didn't just want to confront. I wanted to expose the hidden truth behind that label that had locked me there. I remembered my mother's words. The respect you accept is the respect you teach. In that moment, I understood that if I silently accepted this situation, I would be teaching them and everyone watching from afar that it was okay to treat someone this way. No, I wouldn't allow it. The sound of hurried footsteps in the hallway brought me back to the present. I recognized the muffled voice of someone calling Amanda. I couldn't make out the words, but I could tell by the urgency that something was changing outside. I approached the door and put my ear to it. My heart was beating at a pace I hadn't felt in years, as if my body knew a decisive moment was coming. If you've ever experienced that moment when pain turns into strength, WRITE, the word turn, in the comments. I picked up my phone slowly, like someone picking up a secret from the floor. The light from the screen illuminated my hands, and for a moment I saw each wrinkle like a survival map. I wrote to Donna Zulide with the calm of someone who knows each word is a piece on the board. Locked in the room, door with a key. They say, I'll ruin the photos. She replied almost immediately, as she always did when life got tough. I'm here, trust me. I didn't ask her to come to the house. I asked for something bigger. I asked her to call 911 and describe what was happening, using the right words, the words that carry weight: elderly woman, prison, risk, humiliation. She knew exactly who to call and what to say. While I waited, I began organizing evidence like someone preparing a dossier behind the scenes of a documentary. I filmed the hallway through the doorway, recorded the key turning, and captured the phrase that had cut through the air earlier. It wasn't cheap revenge, it was strategy. A silent transformation of my mindset to stop justifying the unjustifiable and start documenting the hidden truth. I, who had always believed that family resolves at home, understood that certain decisions need to come to light for their impact to be real. The party sound remained steady, but every now and then a laugh would burst out like untimely fireworks, reminding me that, for them, everything was under control. And yet, here inside, the journey had changed direction. I touched the old photo in the album again and whispered to the portrait. This time, I wasn't going to swallow it in silence. Not for God, not for love. It was less a promise and more an internal protocol, adjusting course without losing dignity. Zulide's message arrived short, to the point, with the precision of someone who doesn't waste breath. Open calls. They asked if there's any immediate danger. I replied, door locked, no access to the hallway bathroom. They prevented me from leaving. I'm fine, for now. I wrote for now because that was the truth. I was safe there, but the principle wasn't. And principles, when locked away, become the spark for great revelations. I opened the Notes app and wrote names, times, phrases. Every detail served as a trail, as if I were assembling a timeline for an invisible jury. I thought about how so many women store these events in their memories, unrecorded, and how this backfires when the world demands proof. Today, at least today, I would have mine. This carefulness wasn't paranoia, it was method. Quietly, I repeated to myself, it's not the loudest speaker who controls the narrative, it's the one who brings the facts. In the hallway, the sound of quick footsteps. Someone complained about the cake. Someone else asked about the candles. Amanda responded with that well-worn tone of a performer. Everything's perfect, everyone. I smiled to myself. Perfect is the word people use when they haven't looked closely. The perfection of that setting had cracks, and I could see them from here. It was only a matter of time before the glow of the photos wouldn't obscure the shadows of their behavior. I felt my phone vibrate again. Zulide, if they ask, I can confirm I heard you on the phone. They're already on their way. I thanked them, with a leisurely typed heart. Strange how such a small icon can carry so much relief. I slipped the phone into my coat pocket and let my fingers rest on the fabric, like someone protecting a ticket. The return ticket to my voice. I thought about my son, not the adult version who chooses convenient silence, but the boy in the photo, with his mouth smeared with icing and his open smile. I questioned when his compass had lost its bearings, and at the same time, I rejected. The idea that my memory would have to forgive everything to continue loving. Loving and allowing are not synonymous. Loving is also maintaining boundaries. That was another decision I made there. I would no longer accept explanations that dress aggression in etiquette. A light breeze blew under the door, bringing the scent of lit candles and spilled soda. The world outside was in all right mode, but I could sense a shift in the air, like when the weather changes and the sky suddenly darkens. This foreboding didn't come from fear, it came from coherence. When the truth begins to fall into place, the environment notices it before people do. It's the kind of impact you feel on your skin. I stood up, squared my shoulders, and discreetly wiped away the tears that had trapped the corners of my eyes. It wasn't a pose, it was preparation. Silently, I mentally organized my next steps: remain calm, present the facts, and refuse to be reduced to a family drama that wasn't drama. It was a limit, and limits, when ignored, call for witnesses. It was then that, in the distance, a different sound cut through the music. It wasn't a toast, it wasn't laughter. It was something constant, drawing closer, cutting across the street like a reminder that things change when they need to. I pressed my palm against the photo in the album, took a deep breath, and let the certainty settle on my face. The exact size of the woman I still am. If you know, when courage turns into action, WRITE, the word sign in the comments. The noise began as a distant sound, almost drowned out by the music and voices singing happy birthday. But as it got closer, something in the energy of the house shifted. The clapping slowed, the laughter lingered in the air, and a thick silence replaced the festive atmosphere. I knew what was happening before I even saw it. There was a kind of presence you sensed before you even show up at the door. The presence of authority. The first firm voice I heard wasn't that of a guest, but of one of the officers asking, "Who is Mrs. Dorothy?" My breathing became heavy, and even though I was locked inside, I sat up straight in bed. It was as if the room where they wanted to erase me had suddenly become the center of everything. Outside, hurried footsteps, chairs scraping, and that tension typical of when something shatters the perfect facade everyone tries to maintain. The door swung open, and the police officer entered, followed by another. Their gaze wasn't curious, but clear. They knew what they were looking for. They asked if I was okay, and before I could even answer, I noticed other eyes appearing behind them. Neighbors. Zulaid was there, arms crossed, the expression of someone who knew exactly the weight of the scene. I didn't need to say much. All they had to do was look at the lock, still turned from the inside, and at me sitting away from the party. I told the truth simply, almost surgically. It wasn't the first time I'd been excluded from an important moment. It wasn't the first time they'd used the guise of etiquette to push me out of their memories. Some of the neighbors confirmed this, recalling episodes where they'd seen me crying in the backyard or sitting alone while the rest of the family celebrated. Each of their stories seemed to dismantle, brick by brick, the image of perfection Amanda had constructed. As I spoke, I saw her expression change out of the corner of my eye. First, a contained tension. Then, the discomfort of someone no longer in control of the narrative. My son, standing behind, kept his eyes lowered. I don't know if it was shame, fear, or an inability to deal with his own omission. I only knew that this moment was no longer about personal wounds. It was about showing that this wasn't an isolated incident, but rather a pattern. The officers asked direct questions, wrote down answers, and asked to see the door and key. One of them pointed to the album on the bed, as if sensing that object had something to say. I explained that those photos were my own record of who I was to that family, and that perhaps they were trying to rewrite history by excluding the very root that sustained it all. The neighbors murmured among themselves, some indignant, others visibly moved. Zuladi, in a firm voice, said, "This has to stop. It's not just about her. How many others go through this and remain silent?" It was true. The scene there had a much greater impact than just my story. It was a mirror for everyone who has ever felt treated like a burden after a lifetime of dedication. Outside, the party was practically frozen. The candles on the cake slowly melted, forgotten. The photos they'd so desperately wanted to be perfect were now tarnished by the reality that had invaded the room. And, ironically, the image they'd wanted to hide had become impossible to erase. I didn't know exactly what the police officers' next steps would be, nor how the family would react after they left, but something inside me was clear. This would no longer be a memory, kept only in my memory. Now there were witnesses. Now there was a record. And when the truth is seen, it's much harder to deny. If you understand what it's like to see a facade crumble and the truth finally come out, write the word clarity in the comments. As I watched the eyes around me, I realized that this moment wasn't just about me. It was about everyone who has felt the pain of being left out, even after everything they've done. So I wanted to hear other voices besides my own. If anything in this story has upset you, leave your thoughts in the comments below. Share your experience, your opinion, or even a feeling this scene evoked in you. Each comment here becomes a living testament to the fact that these situations aren't isolated cases, but rather a reality that needs to be addressed. When you leave your voice here, when you like the video, YouTube understands that this message deserves to reach more people. It seems like a small detail, but it's what makes the channel grow and bring these stories to those who may be experiencing the same pain and need to know they're not alone. And if you want to continue following real stories like this, subscribe to the channel. This is how we create a community where every story matters, where every memory has a place, and where no one needs to be silenced. I remained there, firm, with the feeling that, at that moment, the weight of silence was changing sides. The officers asked me to explain exactly what had happened, and I realized this was the moment when every detail would count. It wasn't just my word against theirs. I had something stronger. I took a deep breath, took my phone from my coat pocket, and placed it on the bed. The screen lit up, revealing an organized list of files, screenshots of messages, audio recordings, photos of the hallway with the door closed, and finally, the recording I knew would have the necessary impact. She was the one who recorded everything, even though she was locked up, Zulite said, with a slight smile of approval. The police officers approached as I pressed play. Amanda's voice echoed clearly, leaving no room for interpretation. Today is a youth party. I don't want you to appear in the photos. Her tone carried the coldness of someone who believes no one will have the courage to expose her. The silence that followed that playback was heavier than any scream. The officers looked at each other, took notes, and asked me to upload the files to their system. I did so without hesitation. Each click to attach was like placing a firm stone in the path of truth. I knew that from that moment on, there was no turning back. The masks they'd tried to maintain fell away the instant the evidence became irrefutable. As I sent the files, I explained that this wasn't an isolated incident. I explained how, over the years, small humiliations had recurred under the guise of good manners and concern. These weren't lapses. They were calculated decisions to push me out of the center of family life. I saw neighbors nod, confirming stories they themselves had witnessed. It was as if a collective memory had suddenly surfaced, proving that this truth wasn't just in my perception. My son, standing near the door, seemed to shrink with every word. I don't know if it was regret or just the discomfort of seeing everything revealed without the chance to control the narrative. Amanda, for her part, tried to maintain an upright posture, but her fidgety hands betrayed her shaking. She knew the situation had shifted, and that she was now at the center of something she couldn't erase. With smiles for the camera, the officers asked if I wanted to file a formal report. I nodded firmly. I wasn't there to create a spectacle, but to ensure the story was recorded, not just as a defense, but as a preventative measure. I told them, if no one speaks up, this continues. Today it's me, tomorrow it could be someone else. They understood. One of them wrote my words down in the report. As it all unfolded, I felt a strange relief. It wasn't the joy of revenge, but the serenity of finally seeing the truth move out of the shadows. It was like watching a gear that had been stuck for years begin to turn, slowly but surely. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel invisible. Zulid remained by my side, the entire time, like an anchor. She looked at me and said softly, "You did what needed to be done." And for the first time that day, I believed it without hesitation. The impact wasn't just on my life, but on the message that scene would leave for everyone who watched. The noise of the party had completely faded. The cake, already unmolded, lay forgotten on the table. And the photos Amanda had so longed for without me present now had a new element, the undeniable presence of truth. If you've ever felt the weight of proving something that everyone else pretended not to see, write the word proof in the comments. By the time the officers finished taking my statement, the energy in the air was different. There was a different weight, as if the entire house had felt the shift in power. Amanda tried to argue, saying it was all a misunderstanding and that I misread things. But there was no more room for distortion. Not after the evidence, the testimonies, and the presence of neighbors who saw and heard everything. It was like watching a carefully painted facade fade all at once, revealing the cracks that had always been there. The conversation with the police became more formal, almost technical. They explained that she would be charged with elder abuse, and that the case would be pursued in court. When they heard that my grandson lived under the same roof, they immediately opened a protocol to verify custody conditions. The decision came faster than I expected. My son would temporarily lose custody until the investigation was concluded. The news fell like a weight on the floor, and the silence that followed was more deafening than any argument. Amanda stood still, her face rigid, as if trying to calculate how to regain control. My son, on the other hand, seemed to shrink by the second, looking down, unable to face me. I knew this moment was a shock to him, but it was also the result of a series of silent decisions he'd made over the years. He might have thought neutrality would protect him, but now it was clear that silence also takes its toll. The room was filled with looks of a mixture of astonishment and satisfaction. Neighbors whispered among themselves, some visibly relieved to see the truth finally exposed. Others probably wondered how this seemingly organized family could hide so much hostility. I didn't need to say anything to understand that, from then on, we wouldn't be remembered for the cake, the decorations, or the photos. We would be remembered for the day the curtain fell. Inside me, the feeling wasn't of revenge, but of justice. A justice that doesn't scream, but remains. I remembered the times they called me invisible, as if I had no weight in the world, as if my worth was determined by the usefulness I represented to others. And, ironically, that day, I was the focus of everyone's eyes, every whisper. They called me invisible. But now, I'm a national headline. That phrase rang in my head like an echo that, for once, didn't hurt. The local press arrived quickly. The flashing cameras didn't intimidate me. On the contrary, I felt each report was confirmation that my story had broken through the isolation. Some journalists wanted to know more. Others simply captured images of the moment Amanda was led away. It was curious to see how, in a matter of minutes, she had gone from party host to protagonist of a police case. Meanwhile, Zulaid remained by my side, firm, as if she were part of this silent victory. "There's no turning back now," she said, and I nodded in agreement. The truth, once made public, doesn't retreat into the shadows, and exposure, however uncomfortable, is sometimes the only way to ensure history doesn't repeat itself. My grandson was taken to safety, and it brought me a relief I hadn't felt in a long time. He might not understand it at the time, but in the future, he would know that someone had decided to break the cycle. And I knew that from that day forward, he would have a new benchmark for courage, not the kind of courage that makes you loud, but the kind that stands firm even when everyone expects you to back down. As I looked around, I realized the room now seemed smaller. Perhaps it was because the weight of the lie had lifted, leaving room only for reality. And though that reality was harsh, it held a value no amount of acting could offer. If you've ever seen the truth change the course of a story, write the word turnaround in the comments. I returned home late in the afternoon, just as the sun was setting, tinging everything with that golden hue that, in other times, would have warmed me. The street looked the same, but I wasn't. Each step to the door carried the weight of everything that had happened, not just in the last few hours, but in the last few years. The key turned in the lock with a dry sound, and the first thing that struck me was silence. A silence different from the one I'd encountered when they'd locked me in my room. This one was vast, empty, almost echoing. I put my bag on the table and left my coat on the chair. Everything was where I'd left it, but it seemed smaller. Perhaps it was because I now saw with different eyes that had experienced the moment when the truth ceased to be mine alone and became public. I had earned something that had long been denied me, respect, but along with it came the absence that now spread through the room like a slow chill. I walked to the shelf and picked up a photo frame. The photo was from my grandson's 5th birthday. He was smiling, his face smeared with blue icing, and I was standing behind him, holding the plate, laughing too. I remembered how I'd been asked to stand to the side that day, so as not to interfere with the main photo. I did it, and there it was, out of focus, in the right corner of the image. like an unnecessary detail. I sat on the couch with the photo in my hands and let the memory come to me, whole, unfiltered. His voice, his curious questions, his small hands holding mine. I knew I wouldn't see him again anytime soon, maybe for weeks, maybe for months. This was the part no one tells you about certain victories. The price doesn't come in money, it comes in pieces of life you can't get back. I looked at the kitchen table and imagined what it would have been like if he were here today. Maybe we'd be cutting the cake I'd made, or playing storytelling games with the scraps of fabric I keep in a box. Instead, there was only the distant sound of the wind against the window. It was freedom, yes, but it was also distance. I ran my hand over the tabletop, feeling the raised knife marks, scars from so many meals prepared for people who, once upon a time, seemed to see me. It was strange to think that, to earn my place, as a human being, I had to lose my physical place at the family table. I gained respect I never imagined I would have, but the price was this emptiness that now stared back at me. Night fell faster than I expected. I turned on a lamp in the living room, but it seemed to illuminate the absence more than the space. I picked up my phone and saw messages of support from neighbors, acquaintances, even people I couldn't quite remember. Everyone said I'd been brave, that my attitude was inspiring. I read it all with gratitude, but deep down, I knew that courage and loneliness sometimes go hand in hand. I took a deep breath and put my grandson's photo back on the shelf, not as a goodbye, but as a reminder that some battles are won at a high cost, and that part of our journey is learning to live with the space these losses leave. If you've ever felt the weight of a victory that cost more than you imagined, write the word price in the comments. I looked into the camera like someone who needs to hear it, not in a rush, but with the firmness of someone carrying an entire life in their hands. I felt that this wasn't just my story, it was a reflection of so many others that would never be told. I took a deep breath, as if trying to pull out, in one breath, all the words that had been trapped for years. Whoever hides the roots loses the whole tree. The phrase came out of me almost like a whisper, full of truth. I knew she wasn't just talking about me, but about any relationship that is lost when the foundation is ignored. A family isn't sustained solely by smiles in pretty photos or well-set tables. It's sustained by stories, by memories, by hands that worked before us, so we had a place to sit. When someone decides to erase that route, all that's left is appearances don't feed anyone. I kept my gaze steady, but not cold. I wanted whoever was on the other side to feel both strength and vulnerability. It wasn't a sermon, it was a reminder, a call to the responsibility each of us carries, whether as a child, grandchild, neighbor, or friend. Caring for those who cared for us isn't a gesture of charity. It's an act of justice. It's recognizing that we didn't get here alone. As I spoke, images flashed through my mind, the smell of bread I baked before dawn, the nights spent nursing, fevers, the savings saved to buy a gift that would bring a smile to someone's face. None of this was recorded in any album, but it was etched in the memories of the people who received these gestures, or at least it should have been. I settled back in my chair and let the silence fill the space a little. Silence also speaks, and in that moment, it said, remember, because it's easy to forget. It's easy to get lost in the rush of life and not realize that the people who were always there may no longer be. And when you realize it, sometimes it's too late to recover. It wasn't about portraying myself as a victim nor about wearing my grievances like medals. It was about bringing to light a truth many people prefer to avoid. To ignore the foundation that sustained us is to cut off one's own future. So, before anyone listening made the same mistake, I needed to leave these words engraved so they would resonate even after the video ended. I looked out the window and saw the wind swaying the trees outside. I thought about how they endure because they have deep roots. And deep down, I understood that this was what my story was about resisting, even when they tried to tear you from the ground, about staying standing, not because the world was kind, but because you learned to stand firm. I turned back to the camera, with one final thought I wanted to share. Take care of those who took care of you. It's simple, but it's the kind of simplicity that sustains everything that truly matters. Because one day, when the leaves begin to fall, it's to this root that everyone will look. If this message reminded you of someone who was your foundation, write the word root in the comments. If you've made it this far, it's because this story, in some way, touched something deep inside you. So, Before you go, subscribe to the channel to continue receiving real stories, the kind that make us rethink, feel, and sometimes even change the way we see the world. And tell me in the comments that you stayed with me until the end. Writing this message was for me. It's our way of recognizing each other here. Also, leave a like not only because it helps the video, but because, ultimately, it's like saying, I get it, I felt it together. And if you want to continue this conversation, there's a video right here that complements this topic. Click and come with me, because the story isn't over yet.